In this low-code feature focus, we'll talk about JWT Security Access. We'll learn how to access a resource that is protected by JWT. JWT is JSON with token, so we'll learn how to present the token to gain access to the protected resource like an API endpoint. I set up this system to demonstrate the problem. I have entities called feedback, and I created it using the standard entity builder. When you generate content through the entity builder, you automatically get an API. And so, for example, we have the feedback entries API. If we run it, it asks for how many rows we want. We can give it an answer, and it returns back the values from the feedback. If we look at this automatically generated code, we can see that from the security standpoint, it is limited to JWT access and to people in these specific roles. So that's the automatic setup. Let's see how this impacts us. I've created a demonstration form with two fields, a result and a button. Let's take a quick look at that. The result field is just a large text with no attributes, and the get feedback button has a single action, the server request, that calls our feedback entries API and passes in a row limit, but it doesn't have any authentication information. As a second action, we also have an update form with Ajax, which prevents the screen from refreshing. So when we run this form, we click Get Feedback, and we get an error message, and the error is that there is a server response 401 unauthorized. The server request, because it's protected by JWT, is invalid. So one solution that we don't recommend is changing the access from JWT access to public access. This would solve the problem and allow you to call the API endpoint, but it would be a reduction in security. Instead, we're going to discuss the technique necessary to be able to do the server request with the JWT token. In the comments to this low-code feature focus, you'll find a link to these Google Drive documents. We have a document that is an API endpoint that we're going to import. So I'm going to open the API endpoint and copy all of this text. And if we go back into our APIs, and I'm going to use the import endpoint. And once we refresh, we see that we now have a JWT-Get-token-for-user. We'll dig into the details of this in a minute, but let's get our other content loaded. Also in the Google Drive, there is a token JWT-for-user that's in JSON format. This is the one that you'll want to open up if you're using the App Builder Plant an App Tokens interface. The other one, JWT-for-user XML, is if you're using the older My Tokens interface. Either way, you access the tokens, import the content, and paste it. You'll now see that we have a token JWT-for-user that expects a username and a password, and it tells a little bit about how to use it. Now that we've imported the token, I'm going to test it, and it has a username and a value. I have a known username and value that we can use. The password is the same thing with a $sign. You would use a username and password from your own system. I'll execute the token, and I get a big long string back. This is the expected value, and this token is what we'll use in the server request. Since this test worked, I'm just going to copy it so we can paste it. If we return to our test form and customize the form, we'll look for in the Get Feedback button for the server request, and down in the server request, we're going to add a header. The header that we're going to add is an authorization header. It's going to have the value of word bearer plus the paste of our new JWT-for-user token. So we're passing in the username and password. This is going to add authorization onto this HTTP server call. Now we save, refresh, and test. Now when we press Get Feedback, we're getting content from the feedback entries API endpoint. So let's dig in a little bit to see what we've added. In the APIs section, the JWT-Get-token-for-user, we can edit that and see what it's doing. It's expecting two parameters, the username by text and a password by text, and it's doing a server request back to the same domain that this is operating on using the JWT Authorization API mobile login. This is done via a post, and it passes the username and password into it. It gets we also have some special headers, the content type and the character set, but it returns back a login result. We parse the login result into JSON, getting our credentials token. And finally, we output the credentials access token out. So this API, when it runs, returns back an access token. The token that we added, JWT-for-user, we can edit that and take a look. The name of it is JWT-for-user. This is the explanation of how this token is set up, but it just does a call to the JWT-Get-token-for-user API endpoint that we've just set up, and it passes in a username and a password. This makes this token very easy to consume. It's also cached for 300 seconds or 5 minutes, so the token will remain the same and avoid having to do an additional call for 5 minutes at a time. The documentation to the JWT feature indicates that the token is good for an hour, but this is a very conservative 5-minute window. And that's it. This token, JWT-for-user, together with this API, JWT-Get-token-for-user, allows you to return in your form a token that can be used in the server request, and by simply adding an authorization with that token, it will return an authorization token that will pass the JWT authorization. Each of the endpoints that you define, and especially the ones that are automatically defined by the entity builder, has its own set of security to go with it. So for example, the post, which creates a new feedback, if we were to edit that and look at the security, it's available to managers, citizen developers, admins, and low-code engineers, but not users. This is an important distinction in that the username and password that you provide in getting a JWT access token will translate to a user that has a particular set of roles. So in my case, the demo@test.com user, because they are simply a user, they would not have access to this particular API endpoint. Put simpler, you need to make sure that the security of the user matches the security minimum of the endpoint that you want to use. In this episode of Low Code Feature Focus, we've talked about JW Security Access and how you can use it to get information from standard API endpoints that are protected by JWT Security. Is there some feature you'd like to see in our next video? Leave a comment in the section below. For more great low-code content, be sure to subscribe to Plankton App.